What is up, you guys? Welcome to another edition of Controversial Thoughts. One of the biggest questions I get in the realm of things that I talk about is which plants are the most toxic? But I think the underlying question here that needs to be addressed first is, are plants even toxic for humans at all? And this is the subject of a debate that I did with Alex Leaf, and that will be released on Tuesday. My main podcast episodes get released on Tuesdays. The Controversial Thoughts videos come out on Fridays. So look for a debate that I did with Alex Leaf on the topic of plant toxicity, and if it exists, on Tuesday of next week. But I think this is such an important topic that I wanted to do a Controversial Thoughts about it. And I thought that maybe I would give the Instagram algorithms a break from talking about controversial COVID shit, because, you know, those bots, they like break down because they're flagging me so much and they have to shadow ban me all the time and all this other bullshit. So let's give the Instagram bots a break and talk about nutrition and plant toxicity. So you're welcome, Instagram. So when we are thinking about this topic of plant toxicity, the first thing to realize is that there's really no debate about the fact that plants make defense chemicals. There are so many chemicals that are made by plants that are defense chemicals that it's really not even a question. This is an incontrovertible statement. I want to share some studies that I find quite interesting. This one is Animal Plant Warfare and Secondary Metabolite Evolution. It's quite an interesting paper talking about the really long history, 450 million year coevolution of plants and animals, and the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of chemicals that plants have evolved as defense mechanisms, and then the subsequent responses that animals have evolved, including phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification systems, which are things like the cytochrome P450 monooxygenases, and all of the other enzymatic systems in phase 2, which do things like glucuronidation. I'll go into all of that a little bit more in this video later on. But as you see here, the authors say in recent years, the concept of a plant and animal warfare emerged, which focused on the coevolution between plants and herbivores. As a reaction to herbivory, plants developed mechanical defenses such as thorns and hard shells, which paved the way for adapted animal physiques. Plants evolved further defense systems by producing chemicals that exert toxic effects on the animals that ingest them. As a result of these selective pressures, animals develop special enzymes, e.g. cytochrome P450 monooxygenases, CYP450 systems, that metabolize xenobiotic phytochemicals. As the next step in the evolutionary competition between plants and animals, plants evolve to produce non-toxic prodrugs, which become toxic only after ingestion by animals through metabolization by enzymes such as CYP450. If you don't understand that plants have been trying to dissuade herbivory and even omnivorous consumption of plants since the dawn of plant and animal coevolution, this is an important point for me to share with you. The rest of this paper goes into many more details, which are worth reading. If you have interest in this, I would recommend you read the whole paper. Plant secondary metabolites, PSMs, such as alkaloids, terpenes, phenolics, glucosinolates, our beloved isothiocyanates, like are derived from glucosinolates, like sulforaphane, and cyanogenic glycosides, like those found in cassava and many other foods, have been shown to exert effects on herbivores. Hence, herbivores must avoid saturating their detoxification systems, as stated in the detoxification limitation hypothesis. There are many examples of compounds found in common plants such as lavender, thyme, winter savory, rosemary, sage, peppermint, all of which have terpenoids, which are compounds that are problematic for animals and must be detoxified to varying degrees by the cytochrome P450 system and then dealt with in phase 2 detoxification. Let's pause for a moment and make sure everybody understands phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. These are quite interesting concepts that happen in the liver. Everyone always thinks the liver's a filter, right? No, the liver is not a filter. The liver is an enzymatic powerhouse that detoxifies toxins and then prepares them for excretion in the poop and stool the poop and the stool are the same thing, and the urine. So phase one is generally made up of CYP450 enzymes, flavine monooxygenases, alcohol dehydrogenases, hydrolases, esterases, epoxide hydrolases. And then phase two detoxification is all the conjugating enzymes, UDP, glucuronidyltransferase. You guys have heard me talk about that one in relation to piperine in the past. Piperine is a substance found in black pepper, a plant seed that inhibits UDP glucuronidyltransferase. I spoke about this in my book, The Carnivore Code. This is the reason I'm not a fan of black pepper, because when you eat pepper, you are inhibiting UDP glucuronidyltransferase. Well, the conjugation of functionalized metabolites from phase one detoxification with glucuronyl or glucuronide specifically by UDP glucuronidyltransferase is important for the excretion of those compounds. This is why we run into problems with things like dysbiosis, something I talked about with Evan Brand in this week's podcast earlier this week, and compounds produced by dysbiotic bacteria, such as enzyme systems that deconjugate glucuronide from molecules, causing them to recirculate in the enterohepatic circulation. This is why we use things like calcium D-glucarate to inhibit beta-glucuronidase, because we want our body to do glucuronidation. Well, then don't eat a bunch of black pepper, which is clearly a plant seed that doesn't want to get eaten in the first place, and inhibit your UDP glucuronidyltransferase. Furthermore, as I talk about in my book, the reason that curcumin from turmeric is paired with black pepper is because black pepper inhibits UDP glucuronidyltransferase, making curcumin 2,000 more times, quote, bioavailable to the body. Well, your body clearly understood that eating turmeric root is not something you want to do a lot of, that there are compounds in there like curcumin, which I've spoken about in detail in the past and in my book, which are not great for humans at all, and it's trying to get rid of them. And if you inhibit the enzymes that allow your body to get rid of them, you have massively increased amounts of curcumin in your body. So that discussion is in my book. Talked about it a lot. I think I talk about it in the debate with Alex as well. So let's continue here. You don't want to be inhibiting your phase one and phase two detoxification, but plant compounds will be detoxified by those. And there's variability between humans in terms of how much they can do with each plant compound. So here's the deal. There's no question that plants produce toxic compounds. Whether or not these compounds are good for humans or we're adapted to them is a whole nother discussion that I'll get to in a moment. Your body may or may not be good at detoxifying these compounds. And if you're someone that's not good at detoxifying these, you could end up with a whole bunch of these plant defense molecules in your body. And the hypothesis that I and others have advanced is that these could potentially be at the root of things like autoimmunity, right? This is the whole premise of an animal-based diet, eating the least toxic plant foods along with your more nutrient-dense animal foods. If you're not familiar with an animal-based diet, then I would recommend you email us at radicalhealth@heartandsoil.co. We'll send you this infographic that I built for my upcoming cookbook, which tells you which foods I conceptualize as high toxic, medium toxic, and low toxic from the plant kingdom. You can see the high toxic foods are most plant foods. In fact, more specifically, these are mostly plant leaves, seeds, nuts, grains, legumes, which are all plant seeds, stems, and roots. Well, which ones do you think are lower toxic, Paul? What's left? Well, generally, I think of these as fruit. And I talk about this with Alex in the podcast that we did. Again, it'll be out Tuesday, that generally plants are not making as many of these defense molecules that are intended to inhibit or cause problems in our biochemistry in fruit. Plants want us to eat fruit to then ingest the seeds, which we're not actually supposed to chew, when then we poop them out in a pile of fertilizer. So there's a very important distinction that I make in the debate with Alex, that it's not that I'm against plant molecules. It's that I am concerned that we have incorrectly, too rapidly assumed that plants' defense chemicals do not cause problems in humans. The assumption in nutritional paradigms over the last 50 to 100 years has generally been that these plant molecules, these terpenoids, these plant defense molecules are good for us. So a lot of the research hasn't been framed at looking for problems with these molecules. This is the type of thing that I talk about in my book and my work. If you really start to look for problems with plant defense molecules, you can find them, and you can find thousands, tens of thousands of anecdotes of people who appear to get a whole lot better when they remove the majority of these plant defense molecules from their diet by cutting out most vegetables. But Paul, haven't we been told that vegetables are good for us? Yes, we have, because generally vegetables are good for you if you're replacing junk food with vegetables. But I think in terms of a hierarchy of foods that we would have sought out evolutionarily, this is something consistent with what I observed with the Hadza when I visited them. Vegetables are kind of low on the totem pole. If you can get animal meat, animal organs, animal fat, that's the top of the totem pole. Highly caloric things like honey, which is incredibly treasured by the Hadza and all equatorial peoples where honey grows, that's highly valuable for humans. Not a lot of plant defense chemicals in honey because it's made by bees, right? Plants don't need to defend the honey. Bees are not defending the honey from other animals. We ate the hive with the bee larva in it in Tanzania with the Hadza. It was amazing. But as you go down the hierarchy, next you get to fruits, which are generally safe for most humans, though there can be some specific fruits that could cause issues for humans, individuals. And then you get to the plant parts that are more highly defended. And that's how I designed this infographic. It's meant to be a hierarchy of the most and least toxic plant foods based on that. Well, guess what? It's 2021. You are a good hunter because you can go to the grocery store or an online delivery service with White Oak Pastures, or Belcampo, or Primal Pastures, or anywhere else you can get grass-fed, grass-finished meat, or organs, fresh or desiccated, like we make at Heart and Soil. And you can get the best foods on the planet without really having to spend all your time making bows and arrows like the Hadza or spending all your time in the woods hunting animals. And then you can also get the next most sought after foods like honey and fruit with the least number of toxins by just going to the grocery store and selecting what's seasonable and hopefully organic. Easy. So why would you then eat vegetables if they could potentially cause you problems? Now, look, if you're someone that tolerates vegetables and you're healthy, go ahead, eat them. But for myself and many others, we feel, look, and perform much better when we don't make vegetables a big part of our diet. I don't eat any vegetables. My diet was originally entirely carnivorous. It's transitioned to animal-based over the last year because I found that carbohydrates were beneficial for my performance, and many other topics that I've discussed previously on this podcast. You can look back for the history of that if you're interested. And so my diet is meat, organs, mostly desiccated these days from Heart and Soil, shameless plug, and things like honey and fruit, especially being here in Costa Rica. Sometimes I can get awesome organic local fruit, and that is the least toxic food that I can get from the plant kingdom to get carbohydrates. So let's go back to some of these papers and look at these plant toxins. So this is the first paper I showed you guys on animal and plant warfare. And you can see that there's plenty of history of these compounds being problematic for humans and being problematic for animals. The warfare between possums and the eucalyptus plants is an illuminating example of an effective animal detoxification system. This is an answer to the question that I often get asked: if these plants are so toxic, how can animals eat them? Well, animals are adapted to eating these plants. These are herbivorous animals. Possums ingest doses of up to 10 grams of 1/8 cyniol per day, doses which would be quite poisonous for human beings. Terpenes act as inducers of their own metabolism by positive feedback. Animals which have been fed 10 days with a terpene diet showed a 53% increase in CYP450 enzymes. Herbivores are adapted to this, and they have different polymorphisms, different adaptations in their phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. We're not adapted to this, guys. As humans, we have been seeking out animal foods preferentially and the least toxic plant foods for our entire evolution, which is why making those the center of your diet sends a signal to your body that you are the apex predator, that you are a good hunter. If you want to send a signal to your body that you're a crappy hunter and you want to eat crappy survival foods like seeds, nuts, grains, legumes, plant leaves, and stems, you can do that, but you're not going to thrive in the highest way, I believe, for most people. So this is the point of my work, to raise the idea that at an individual level, it is unequivocally clear that there are many people who appear to have polymorphisms or do not tolerate vegetables well, and that eliminating these is essentially not negative at all in terms of nutrients, because we can get all the nutrients we need in animal meat, organs, and fruit or honey. You don't need vegetables for any of that stuff. You can certainly get fiber if you need it, though I'm not a fan of excess fiber consumption, but fruit has some fiber. I've debated many people on the fiber thing in the past. You can look at those previous fiber debates. I'll probably try and do some more. I invited Alex to come back on my podcast to debate fiber. He doesn't seem to want to do it at this point. But as you see here in this paper, Caucasian CYP2D6 deficiency is a well-examined genetic polymorphism, which explains why about 10% of Caucasian population in Europe and North America are unable to efficiently metabolize the brissequine and other plant alkaloids. Well, this is just one polymorphism of one CYP450 monooxygenase. I think these are common in humans, and individually, they can lead to significantly higher levels of these plant compounds that are really toxic in different people, which is why I recommend an animal-based diet if you have autoimmunity or you really just want to see how you're going to perform best. And then you can maybe include plants back in your diet if you really must have a salad, but I think it's a misguided intention. So people often then come back to me and say, but Paul, we're omnivores, right? Omnivores are meant to be able to eat everything. To this, I would say, look at the podcast that I did with Mickey Bendor. In that podcast, I talked about this really, really interesting part of his most recent paper on human trophic level. And in this paper, he discusses the fact that omnivores generally specialized. So analysis of a large N equals 139 data set of mammals trophic levels by Pineda and Munoz and Alroy from 2014 shows that 80% of the mammals in the data set are omnivores. But most of the omnivores, 75%, consume more than 70% of their food from either plants or animals, leaving only 20% of the mammals in the data set to be omnivore generalists. This is the fallacy that I have with Michael Pollan's work, and I would love to get him on the podcast to debate this. I don't think omnivory in humans means omnivory the way that he thinks it means omnivory. This is like the scene in Princess Bride where he says, you keep using that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. Omnivory in the case of Homo sapiens sapiens appears to mean we are either herbivore generalists or carnivore generalists, meaning that we either tend toward animal foods or we tend toward plant foods. And I think most of you will understand that I believe we tend toward animal foods, and that is the way we thrive. And there are countless examples of this. So we are omnivores, which has served us well evolutionarily, but we are animal-based omnivores, hence the moniker of the dietary strategy that I think works best for most people. Now, another point that people bring up, including Alex on the debate that we did, is, Paul, why are there no studies that show that plants are harmful if this is the case? To which I replied on the podcast, look, studies are not designed to see this. We have assumed for the last 100 years that plants are beneficial. If you look at groups of people, which is mostly epidemiology, there really are no studies that have a group without plants and a group with plants. Everybody's eating plants. Some people eat more meat, some people eat less meat, but everyone is eating plants. How are we going to see even an epidemiologic observational signal that plants are harmful for humans in that sort of a design study? Now, as you guys know, maybe you've heard about this. I need to talk more about this in the future. I'm really working hard to develop a nonprofit. We're going to call it I'm going to keep the name a secret, but it's going to be an animal-based research organization that is going to be a nonprofit, and we're going to use that nonprofit to fund studies of an animal-based diet. That is a diet that is based on meat and organs, includes the least toxic plant foods, and is free of vegetables. Imagine that. The medical establishment is going to shit their pants. I can't wait. And we're going to show, or we're going to hypothesize and potentially show, that the elimination of vegetables can be beneficial for autoimmune disease. And this has been shown in the past. There are studies which show that in autoimmunity, for instance, an autoimmune paleo diet, which excludes things like nightshade plants, seeds, and nuts, in addition to beans and grains and dairy, right? Like a paleo diet, an autoimmune diet is more strict, has good improvements in quality outcome measures in Hashimoto's thyroiditis or autoimmune thyroiditis, usually a hypothyroid condition. In fact, essentially a hypothyroid condition. So studies like this have been done, but I don't think autoimmune paleo takes it far enough. An animal-based diet is an extension of that concept, saying get rid of plants that are most toxic and then watch to see what happens with your immune system. So hopefully we will have those studies in the future. As I share with Alex in the podcast, there are some studies of fruit and vegetable elimination that do show an improvement in metrics of oxidative stress and DNA damage. This is a study that I've shown many times and is good to know about. The title is Green Tea Extract Only Affects Markers of Oxidative Stress Postprandially, Lasting Antioxidant Effect of a Flavonoid-Free Diet. Now, the title's confusing because they were using green tea catechins to see if they affected the oxidative stress markers in humans. And in order to do that, they had one group that had no flavonoids in their diet, which was essentially a fruit and vegetable depletion study. So they say at the end of the study, right, since no long-term effects of the green tea epicatechins were observed. The study essentially served as a fruit and vegetables depletion study. The overall effect of the 10-week period without dietary fruits and vegetables was a decrease in oxidative damage to DNA, blood proteins, plasma lipids, concomitantly with marked changes in antioxidant defense. So there certainly are studies like this and many others that I have noted, which point to similar effects. That's in some groups of people, and we need bigger studies of this, but I don't think anyone's doing them because no one is thinking this. Everyone is group thinking the same thing, that plants are so good for us. In some groups of people, when you eliminate both fruits and vegetables, you have improvements in oxidative stress, DNA damage, et cetera. Now, as I point out, I don't think you need to eliminate fruit for the most part. And I would love to see some studies looking at fruit elimination versus vegetable elimination. I've debated Stephen Gundry on fruit. He's not a fan of fructose at all. You can go back and listen to that podcast. But there's another really cool study I found recently that was showing this. So this is 100% fruit juice and measures of glucose control, insulin sensitivity, a systemic review, and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. This is not epidemiology. And if you look at this, results from stratified analysis and univariate meta-regressions also largely showed no associations between 100% fruit juice and the measures of glucose control. Overall, the findings of this meta-analysis of RCT suggest a neutral effect of 100% fruit juice on glycemic control. These findings are consistent with observational studies suggesting the consumption of 100% fruit juice is not associated with an increased risk of diabetes. If you haven't heard me talk about the fact that I do not fear fructose, fruit, or carbohydrates from fruit or honey in whole food form in the past, you're sleeping. You're missing out on my content, guys. I've done a whole podcast where I wore a CGM and ate honey, and I have had so many clients see the exact same thing. When you include carbohydrates from fruit and honey in your diet, maybe even squash or avocado or sweet potatoes, the glycemic control doesn't get better, doesn't get worse, excuse me. But there are so many in the keto space who are really zealous about this, and I fear they are missing the boat here. They say carbohydrates cause diabetes, carbohydrates cause diabetes, carbohydrates cause diabetes, and I say wrong, wrong, wrong. They don't. They may worsen glycemic control if you are already metabolically dysfunctional, but I believe the roots of that have to do with mitochondrial membranes and seed oils. And I've spoken about that in the past as well. Indeed. Okay, last thing I want to wrap up with this. So in summary, my position is that plants are defending themselves. This is not even up for debate. They make defense chemicals. I do not think these are good for humans. And if you really dig into that, I think you can create a pretty solid argument to suggest that so many of these purported benefits of these plant molecules fall away when we look at them in the context of benefits we can get other places. Who's to say the benefits of sulforaphane or any other molecule you get in a plant can't be obtained from just eating meat and organs? Generally, I think they can. And there are lots of ways you can stimulate your NRF2 system, which is the main sort of transcription factor that controls transcription of antioxidant response elements in our genome. You can do that with cold exposure. You can do that with fasting. You can do that with exercise. You can do that with all sorts of things. And you can also do it just living your general life. There's so much out there, guys, that will give us optimal antioxidant status, which is, I believe, why there are many studies of fruit and vegetable elimination or decrease in the human diet that don't show any decline or any change in human markers of antioxidant stress or DNA damage, any of these things. I've spoken about these studies in much detail. I enumerate many of them in the podcast with Alex debate coming on Tuesday. So do not fear removing vegetables from your diet. Kale is bullshit. Broccoli is garbage. Spinach is not your friend. Leave them out and see if you feel better. There are so many anecdotes of this that cannot be ignored. Even though we don't have large population studies, my contention is that this is due to a failure of the methodology of these studies, and it's impossible to ignore the thousands, the tens of thousands of people who have now experienced benefits from thinking about plants on a spectrum of toxicity. The last thing I will add to this is that there are so many testimonials at Heart and Soil that are impossible to ignore from people doing animal-based diets. It's just unreal how much people benefit from this kind of thing. And I just want to share a couple of these reviews with you. So this one is from Aaron Stoltenberg. He says, "Thank you, Heart and Soil Supplements. I'm currently taking Heart of the Warrior. bone marrow and liver, bone matrix, gut and digestion, and histamine immune. He's got a full gamut here. So far, I feel sharper clarity and focus. I also feel my energy levels are more sustained throughout the day. I have less stomach flare-ups, and I feel strong overall. I had an ACL surgery in February. The Heart and Soil supplements have been a big part of my recovery process. That's amazing. And if you look on our website, guys, heartandsoil.co, there are hundreds and hundreds of these testimonials of people using our supplements, just an easy way to get organs in your diet, and often in conjunction with an animal-based diet to really find improvements. So how can this be? Well, we just need more studies, but it's impossible to ignore. Now, thousands, tens of thousands of anecdotes, these really can't be ignored. This one is from Jose. For me, it has always been about filling the void. Growing up in a ranch lifestyle, we had the best foods ever. Ever since I joined the military, the food we get to us during training, deployments, or even what can be purchased at local commissaries is not that great. I feel like my overall health has declined due to what we have available to us. Once I heard and read the carnivore code, I became further engaged. I went to Heart and Soil and purchased beef organs for my first bottle. I feel I'm getting back what I lost over the years. My overall health, how I look, how I perform are essential and very important to my job and to the way I live my life. True nourishment comes from nose to tail diets. People need to understand this. I had it growing up as a child and young adult, only to be taken away from me later in life. If you cherish your overall health, want to look good and feel good, make the change with your diet and exercise. We cannot get everything we want locally. With beef organs, I fill that void. I have now purchased whole package and lifeblood. These days are now exciting days. Start living your life the way it is intended. Thank you to Jose. Thank you, Jose, for your service. I think the fact that our supplements are getting to the hands of service members makes me so excited because I think this is one of the best applications. There's more coming on that front from us. But as I said to Alex in the podcast, we cannot ignore tens of thousands of anecdotes, people who improve their overall health when they eat this way. What is going on there? There is clearly a connection between plant compounds, these defense molecules, and autoimmunity. And hopefully this video makes it a little more simple to understand. The last thing I want to talk about is this very interesting idea that when animals eat plants, many of these phytonutrients, quote, phytochemicals, do end up in meat and milk. So this is a really cool study from Stefan Van Villiet, Fred Provenza, Scott Kronberg. Hopefully I'm going to have Stefan on my podcast soon, but several studies have found increasing antioxidant activity in meat and milk of grass-fed versus grain-fed animals. In this study, they enumerate the many studies that have been done looking at plant compounds that end up in meat. So at first glance, you can look at this and say, well, Paul, does this invalidate the things you're saying about these plant compounds? If they're ending up in meat, how can they be bad for us? And I don't think it does. The way I think about this is that animals are doing the detoxification work for us. There's some of these compounds ending up in the meat, which really covers us on both ends. If you think these compounds have any benefit for you, and we've probably been exposed to them throughout our evolution, then you're going to get them in meat. You're not even going to miss phytochemicals if you don't eat vegetables. Here's another reason to not eat vegetables that haven't already been detoxified. Here's another reason that animal meat and organs are truly the best foods on the planet, because if these phytochemicals are ending up in them, the animals have already processed the phytochemicals, and the amounts in the meat is lower, perhaps. They've gone through the process of moving these around for us. They've done the detoxification work for you with enzymatic systems that are actually evolutionarily adapted to these molecules rather than our evolutionary system, which we don't really know if it's that adapted to these chemicals because we haven't been seeking them out as primary herbivores for 2 to 4 million years of hominid evolution. So we can't ignore the fact that for so many people, the elimination of these foods results in better improvements in health. For myself, it did, definitely with my eczema. Again, there's thousands of stories here. And we can't just sweep all this under the rug and make widespread guidelines for people saying eat tons of vegetables, especially at the expense of more nutrient-rich, less toxic foods like meat and organs. So the takeaway is this: make meat and organs the center of your diet. If you want to eat plant foods, make the least toxic plant foods the next things you eat. Eat on the hierarchy of toxicity, as I talked about with that infographic, which you can get by emailing us at radicalhealth@heartandsoil.co. So hopefully this video is helpful. Look for the podcast debate with Alex Leaf coming Tuesday. Love you all. Stay radical. Check us out, heartandsoil.co. Reclaim your birthright to radical health.